Welcome to Coffee in the Barn, where every cup tells a story. With a rotating lineup of hosts, we invite you to join us as we explore the diverse challenges and triumphs of modern life and the heart of agriculture. From the fields to the classroom, from innovators to everyday visionaries, each episode brings a fresh perspective and a new voice. So brew yourself a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's uncover the stories that shape our lives, our farms, and our communities. Well, hello, and welcome to Coffee in the Barn this week with my good friend, Dr. Christine Alvarado. Christine, I know things have changed for you recently, so I'd love you to introduce yourself to the audience and give a little bit of background of your career and kind of where you're at today with all of it.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks for having me on, Casey. I appreciate it. Just a quick background on myself. I am a poultry scientist and food scientist, did all my degrees at Texas A&M University, and then jumped into being a professor for 20 years. So I was at Virginia Tech, Texas Tech, and Texas A&M. And so got a really good background from, scientific method regarding both food safety and also meat quality. Poultry is my background, and I have a strong love for poultry, but I have dabbled into some of the other meats as well, too. From there, I jumped to FSIS for a couple of years and was in policy development there, and then decided to go a little bit more in the allied industry. I also worked for a poultry company for a while in quality assurance, quality control. And then, as I said, decided to jump out into the allied industry. So for the past few years, I've been really focusing on food safety, ingredients and interventions, and also ingredients for improved meat quality. And as of last week, I worked for Dr. G's. So they are also an ingredient company, marination and batter breading specifically. And so I've been there for a few days and absolutely loving my career and loving the path that it's taking me on.
Well, awesome. And we met because of some of our similar goals and outreach and supporting women. Can you tell us a little bit about the program that you started with a few other amazing women in the meat and poultry industry?
Yeah. So, sorry to ask this question, but which program do you want me to talk about specifically?
The Women in Meat.
Women in Meat. Yeah. Okay, yeah, good. Right. I just wanted to make sure because there were several things that I've been involved in the last couple of years, and I wanted to make sure I was heading down the right direction.
I couldn't remember the exact name. So
no, it's perfect. WMIN are the initials for it. So for those of you out there that are in the meat industry, it is not only for women. So don't think that you can't join if you're not a woman. But anyway, we it's been a really interesting, progression. I think there's been a lot of informal ways of supporting each other in the industry. The poultry industry, the meat industry, it's normally been male dominated industry. And I will say that is continually evolving and continually changing. For example, at Dr. G's, we are a C-suite of predominantly women. So that's been a really interesting, week of work. It's been really fun. Actually, it's the first time I'm ever involved in something like that. But going back to WMIN, so it was originally started as, just a way to support women in the industry, especially women that are kind of getting into the industry, recently graduated or recently come into the industry, maybe even from a different industry. And so it's just a way to formalize some of the networks that we, have been doing for a long time and just getting it actually set into an organization. And so some of the great things about that is that they do a lot of podcasts. They do mentorship programs that was recently launched. And so if anyone is interested in joining that, just going to the website and signing up to be either a mentor or a mentee, and just providing a little bit more structure to give support to those new folks coming in. And it's things like, how do you negotiate, or, how do you ask for maybe, a different type of position within your company, whether it's moving up or, even moving to a different area. How do you navigate things like maternity leave, right? Which are things that people have a lot of experience with, but we've never been in a way that we can formalize talking about it, and having a place for people to come ask questions about how did you handle this, or what did you do with this, or, how did you navigate coming back to the workforce with a newborn? I mean, those are all really relevant things, and becoming more relevant as we start seeing a lot more women coming into our industries.
So a very similar platform to what we're trying to also create here a little bit on Coffee in the Barn, and talking about, both science and work life, right? Because it's both
right
that we have to balance and help get our message out in agriculture and the food industry.
Yeah, if I can, I'm just going to interject something here, because I wrote a blog about this not too long ago, but I really hate the word balance, because I don't ever think we're ever in balance. And when I think about balance, I think of like a Bosu ball or something, something like that, where you're trying to, you're either leaning to the left or leaning to the right. It's either work or it's family, and you're always trying to navigate that balance. And it's really, really, really hard to do. Even folks with a lot of experience, and, folks that have been trying to do that for a long time, it's really, really difficult to do. So I like to use the word harmony, just because to me, it makes it a little bit easier to try to figure out harmony between work and life, instead of trying to balance the two, because one of them are always going to be out of balance. There's times, where work is going to take a priority. There's times where family is going to take a priority. There's time where you're actually going to split between those two. And so I like to maybe redefine that phrase and try to use a little bit more of the term harmony. I know in my mind, it makes it a little bit easier to handle than trying to figure out a way to balance.
No, I agree. And I think more and more women are speaking out about that as well. And I speak out about that. It's not really balance. It's what you need to get done today, and your life stage, right? And there are some people who make it look easy, but it's probably not. And
no, it's not. And we all have that guilt associated with that, right? And so to me, harmony takes the guilt out. Maybe it's just a wording for me, but it sure makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah. Well, awesome. This month, we wanted to bring on a food safety specialist, and that's you. You go around and teach all these awesome food safety programs. I see you doing tons of stuff on it. And we're looking at this month at antimicrobial resistance. And we obviously talked about from a veterinarian perspective with Dr. Michelle Crom. And now it's really getting on food safety. And I just attended 2 pet events this month, actually, or in October. So you guys are listening in November. But food safety and recalls have been a discussion point. And then the recent thing with McDonald's and the bad onions on the quarter pounders. Where does the industry, from the live production to the food side, kind of walk us through how we can help prevent, antimicrobial resistance, but keep safe food for humans?
Right. Yeah. So that's a great question, and it's an ever evolving field. So, a couple of years from now, we might be having a different discussion as new technologies develop and so forth. But first of all, I'm gonna say, and I'm going to speak specifically about the poultry industry, but this can be applied to others as well. We've done an amazing job with keeping food safe. We've evolved since I first started in this industry. Beginning of HACCP is when I first started. So we've really done a great job in knowing what goes on in our production and processing areas, and mitigating risks, and understanding what technologies are out there to reduce the risk of foodborne pathogens. So first, I want to say that, because we always hear about outbreaks, in the news, but we never, ever, ever hear about the 99% of the rest of the time that we do an amazing job. So I just want to highlight that the industry is very forthcoming and is very, focused on preventing risk. So that's one of the first things. But what I can say is that, in raw agricultural products, we are going to have issues of concern. We're going to have, in the poultry industry, specifically salmonella, and antimicrobial resistance can happen anywhere. It doesn't necessarily have to be, an antimicrobial or a pH change or anything like that occurs during the processing system to create antimicrobial resistance. It can happen in nature. Like any kind of external force against that bacteria can create antimicrobial resistance. So I wanted to throw those two things out just to make sure, everyone's aware that this is something that nature takes care of a lot of times. But from a production and processing standpoint, I think the biggest thing to know is we have detection methods, and we have methods of determining serovars, virulence factors, antimicrobial resistance, and a lot of information about bacteria that is at the production facility, that's coming into our processing plant, that's moving through the system, and that's getting into the final package. The thing to note is that those are all a little bit different. For example, we may have antimicrobials that can be used out in live production and can decrease the risk associated with that. However, once we get into the processing plant and we begin to go through evisceration, we begin to go through cut up, we begin to do all those processes to turn that animal into an edible type product, into meat, muscle into meat, we start exposing things like air sacs, we start exposing things like bone marrow, and some of these salmonella can become intrinsic in the bird, that can become systemic in the bird. And so we did a study, oh my gosh, I feel like it's been forever ago, but we did a study with ARF in combination with Texas A&M University, and really kind of looked at that and found that some of these serovars that can become systemic really do end up getting through the system through, cutting open the bird and through the air sacs and through the bone marrow and that. And because we now know that information, there's targeted areas that processors can take to apply certain antimicrobials or processes, right, to reduce and mitigate that risk. So I guess my point is, over all of this, is that we now know a lot more about each of these serovars and about each of these bacteria, specifically salmonella mainly, but also campylobacter in poultry, to identify the risks at live production for high virulent antimicrobial resistant bacteria, as well as that moving through the system to processing. And because of that, all the establishments know what those risks are and what bacteria and serovars that they're working with and what the qualities of those serovars are. And so because of that, we are better able to target interventions and to reduce that risk for consumers.
Well, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, that was a big mouthful. Sorry.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, wow, Christine. Okay, that's exactly what we wanted to cover in 5 questions. Great job. But really, I think you made a good point in the beginning of that, is that there's been this misconception out in the industry that recalls are bad, where a lot of those recalls happening more on the pet food space has actually been good, because the animals haven't been infected with it. They've recalled it and found it before it impacted the consumer. And we're seeing that a lot in these recalls. So, the media makes it sound so bad, but they're actually a really good component of our quality assurance and quality control process. Obviously the McDonald's one was kind of a sad one, but really recalls are kind of good in my mind. And that walks us into, the role of quality assurance in the prevention. As you said, you went through all those processes about controlling pathogens, but also ensuring antimicrobial resistance. When you hear that, a lot of the general consumers or people will think antibiotics, but it's really more than just antibiotics that these bugs can learn to evade.
Right. True. And I mean, also think about that human component too, right? Like we don't use anti not antimicrobials. We don't use antibiotics. Sorry. We don't use antibiotics of human medicine in animals, right? So there's a huge component of also antimicrobial resistance that can occur also from misused prescriptions, right? And so it's multiple factors involved. It's not just animal agriculture is bad because we do XYZ. It's really it's really more complex and more complicated than that per se. What I will say is that going back to the recall issue, not issue but discussion is that you never want to have a recall. Period. As an establishment, you never ever want to have a recall. But recalls are there, and tracing and traceability are there. Even things from are there to help minimize and mitigate risk, right? And so, yes, recall is a method to use to prevent bad things from happening. We never really ever want to get there, but at the same time, recalls have worked, and they have and think about what we consider to be in commerce can mean it's sitting on somebody's back dock. So there have been recalls that have occurred where it's never really left the establishment per se. It's left it on paper, but it has not entered into commerce to cause any harm to people. So when you read about a recall, you can always find out more information about it, and I encourage people to do that as well. But just because you hear a recall has happened does not mean that in all cases that it can create a risk for consumers. So, and recall methodologies do work. And that's why even things from a retail grocery store, using your Kroger card or whatever card that you have, right, that can tie what you've purchased, all of that is part of the system to help mitigate risk. So there's a lot of things put into place to minimize that.
Well, and I agree. So how do we talk about that? Because obviously, I hate to keep bringing up the McDonald's one, but that's the most recent one in the news. And they said the quarter pounder, and they're like, oh, the beef, it's going to kill the beef industry. And then, you read more into it and they investigate more, and, it's the onion slivers. But how do we talk to our consumers? How do we get that message out when a recall happens? Because it's a massive brand hit. I mean, we look at the Boar's Head. We look at, Blue Buffalo on the pet food side and different things on the recalls in the past. I'm just some of them that I've been aware of, and they can really hammer brand reputation and stuff. So how do we talk about that to our consumers when recalls happen?
Yeah, and that's a tough one, to be honest with you. And so back up 1 second, because I've been traveling on a plane. I've been traveling this week, so teaching an industry class. So it's been kind of a crazy week. Did they say that it was the onions then? I have not read further. I heard about that, the outbreak. I heard about the quarter pounder, but I didn't look into any more of that.
Sorry. And I was here. I'm spreading rumors that it's the onions and not the beef.
No. I knew that they were looking at the onions. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It came up yesterday, and I have not confirmed the final report yet.
Okay. Well, you're way ahead of me on that. So I didn't hear any of that. But it's a hard one, because especially when people are affected and illnesses occur and deaths occur. I mean, that's you never ever want to see that happen. And so talking about risk and food supply is really it's really hard to discuss with consumers. But what I will say is that there's ways you can be up to date with recalls if consumers are concerned about that. There's ways that, reading the news, and there's ways that you can get recall information. But I think most importantly is that we understand as consumers that the industry is doing everything that they can to minimize that risk and to get people a safe food supply. Like, that is people's job, right? Is to make sure that risk is minimal, to make sure that people have good quality food that is safe to eat, that you can feed your family. And like percentage wise, I don't know, but I'm going to throw out the 99% of the time, everything goes very, very smoothly. And when we do have those recalls, sometimes it's multiple breaks in the system, right? And that's where continuous improvement comes in. But I think the worst thing that we can do is, one, spread rumors, two, try to discern what happens and try to figure out and create fear in consumers when we don't have that final, this is what happened, this is how it happened, and this is why it happened. And that takes a while. And so it requires patience of all of us to do. But I think the worst thing that we can do as an industry is make assumptions, spread rumors, and then create fear. And that's what I wish that we could minimize with media, because I get letting people know information, but information is different than spreading rumors and creating fear, right? Or making assumptions on things. And so a lot of times that happens in media while we're trying to get the word out. And I wish that we could do a better job of that, because sometimes it does create a lot of unnecessary fear. And and like I said, it's unnecessary to create that with consumers. The other thing is, brand recognition. I mean, let's just look at what happened with Bluebell. I mean, I'm from Texas, and there was a listeria outbreak, but people were like really mad that there was no Bluebell in that freezer. And when they finally got it in there were lines out the door, right? So I think that people are tied to brands, and I think that there is a lot of brand loyalty, but I think it's how we present information to that consumer through the media. And that's what I wish that we would control, because I do believe that there is brand loyalty in with products with consumers.
No, I love all that. And I knew you were going to teach me on the McDonald's thing until I have the full facts. It's still fresh in my mind, but people will be listening to it, and there may be facts out there that we have a final ruling. But I just always think of, how do we communicate this? And then how do we bring it together? You're closer to the consumer than the producers, and we all have our role to play in food safety. And we have to say that the U.S., regardless of what people think, we have probably the number one food safety in the world still today, through all the different programs we have done. HACCP's been a great addition to our food safety program. But, I hear more often things going wrong from buying local eggs, or people not trusting our food chain to be safe. So they're going to raise their own food. And then my friend's an inspector in Kansas, and she sends me some pictures of livers of these animals who haven't been dewormed and things like that she's got to condemn, but there's that mindset that big food's not safe, but my little homegrown animal is safer for me. And we all need to do our part in the food supply, and even the consumers, of storing our food properly to cooking it, and just kind of, I think, getting that message out that
100%. And I'm getting agitated. If you can see me, I'm moving around in my chair because this is my soapbox. I mean, girl, this is my soapbox. We took home ec and ag out of the classroom. I can't remember, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. I don't know. I'm kind of old. We took it out a long time ago. And that was our connection, right? We need to put that back in the classroom. And I get we have all of these requirements from education, at the state level. I get that. But the state level is so far removed from agriculture. The state level is so far removed from production animal agriculture and growing crops. And, they're so far removed as well. And so we have got to make a change in our education system, because the only way we're going to make a change in society is K through 12. When you get to be my age, sometimes those habits are hard to change, and people go, that's never happened to me. I'll be fine, And 3 days later, they get a stomach bug, right? From something that they ate from their backyard or whatever. Maybe it was eggs or, raw milk or who knows what it was, because they don't trust big animal ag. And so, I really think that's going to be where we need to make the changes, is in that K through 12, and putting that ag back in the classroom, whether it be a home ec class, or just any kind of agricultural production class where we really talk about these things. And that is going to be the change that we need to see for the future generations. So I have a huge soapbox on that. If I could get to every state capitol and stand on the steps and petition for that, that's what I would be at the for education, because we really are doing everyone a disservice.
Well, definitely. There's a lot less life skills being taught in general. Parents don't take that time. I remember even just learning to change a tire. I hated doing it, but I learned how to do it, right?
Right.
But
right.
we look at that so disconnected on our screens, and there's so much disinformation and so-called influencers who are even experts on how to raise pigs. And then I make a comment as a professional PhD, and I always have to put a tagline in there. I'm not a veterinarian, so seek veterinarian advice. Well, we don't offer veterinarian advice here.
Right.
But I said, being a PhD, I legally have to state that, because I'm not a veterinarian talking about a health challenge, right? And it's just, everybody thinks they're the expert, and yet they don't ask the right advice. And I thought it was really interesting and so off the mark. I think, what's that, KibbleCon, and they said that most people get dietary advice for their pets. So this is assuming that dietary advice for themselves would come from their doctors, but they get it from their veterinarian. And I don't.
Yeah, so they don't.
Through.
Yeah, so even human doctors, they're not dietitians. Supposed to call them dietitians, so they're not dietitians, right? And so we really have to. We've become so specialized in our society, which is amazing, because we, like I said, we now know virulence factors. We now know all this stuff, on a microbial level, that we can now go in and fix and change and do. But that also requires maybe multiple people helping us through our lives with pets, with our own, nutritional advice, our own, physician physical advice. And so it requires kind of multiple people, and there's not a one-stop shop. Like, I'm a poultry scientist, I'm not an accountant. So my specialty is that, and before we used to have multiple specialties across the board. And, I wish that we could teach that to the younger generation, because I really think that that's going to be the change that occurs, that we need to occur as we go through this. And one more thing I was going to say about the safest food supply in the world, which I do believe that we have. In fact, I'm going to say, I'll say most all, just in case I don't know 100%, but most all export, certifications, how you approve exports, from a food safety standpoint, are based on USA regulations. And so we have a really good CDC, we have a really good USDA FSIS, we have a really good FDA, and they actually work together to make sure that we are mitigating risk and creating a safe food supply. A lot of other countries don't have that same system set up. And so they may look safer on paper, but that may mean that they're not tracking and tracing like we do. And so just because our numbers may be higher than some other countries doesn't mean that we're worse off than them. So you really have to look into the how and the why.
Well, that is really great. Before we go, I think this kind of wraps up a full circle, because you and I can talk for hours.
I know.
Nobody wants to listen to that. Is there any last parting wisdom that you have for the audience based on what we've all talked about on this episode?
I guess I kind of want to leave everybody on a positive note. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's from people that may not be experts in the area. And so I was telling you earlier before the podcast that we did a science over soundbites discussion of a friend of mine and I did. And really, look at your sources. Really try to, find if you see something on TikTok that may not be expert that's speaking. And so really, we've got all kinds of information at our fingertips. And so take 5 minutes and really figure out if what's being said is the truth, or if there's, if it's not true, period. So I guess I just encourage everybody to really look at sources and resources to find out the right information. And with that said, I think that I'm really glad to be working in our industry. I think we have come a long way from when I first started 30 years ago. I'm not going to say exactly how old I am, but 30 years ago. And I'm excited about all the good things and changes that we've made to mitigate risk and to make food safe, and also to include high quality in that. Because sometimes, we can focus a lot on the safety and forget about the quality. And I think our industry has really done a great job of meshing those two things together to provide people with safe and wholesome food. And so I get excited about that. I get excited about my career and working in the industry. And I just want other people to know that we're doing the right things to make sure that you and your family stay safe and have good food to eat.
Well, I am glad you left it at that, because I think that's a perfect ending, that we're all doing the best we can. And that's why I wanted to have you on to talk about both AMR, food safety, and the One Health, right? Because we talk about people, animals, and plants, but really food safety brings all that together
100%.
Also as well. So thank you so much, Christine, for being
thanks for having me.
Coffee in the
It was
Bar.
great. I appreciate it.